My name is Mark Hyman. I'm the director of the Shirley Povich Center for Sports Journalism. A few announcements before we get to the panel. This event is being recorded, and the link will be available tomorrow morning. Josh Land helped me on the Merrill College YouTube site? Yeah, okay. After the panel conversation, we'll set aside some time for audience questions, so please be ready for that. Finally, a question for the audience. Is anyone headed to Albany on Friday for the round of 16 game between Iowa and Colorado? Show of hands. Okay. That, of course, is the next installment of the Caitlin Clark Show. And I've been doing some shopping for you, just in case you change your mind. And as of this afternoon, the lowest price for a ticket to the next Caitlin Clark game in section 232, row D, is, anybody want to take a guess? Lowest ticket price. Who said 1,200? You're wrong. $936. And that's the lowest. The prices go as high as $6,300 for Caitlin Clark's next game. So I think we have plenty to talk about. At this point, I would like to introduce the Dean of Merrill College of Journalism, Rafael Lorente. Rafael.
Thank you, Mark. Nobody's here to hear from me, so I'm going to keep this short. But I did think when he asked who was going, I thought maybe he was going to raffle some tickets or something, right? I was like, but no. Anyway, welcome, everyone. Welcome to the Philip Merrill College of Journalism, and welcome to the Shirley Povich Center for Sports Journalism. I am not qualified to talk to you about the Caitlin Clark effect, except to say that when sports fans are arguing whether you're the best ever, about what your legacy will be, or whatever other trash somebody is spewing on sports radio, you have had an effect. So how appropriate that tonight's panel is being held under the banner of the Shirley Povich Center for Sports Journalism. Shirley's effect on journalism, sports and otherwise, lives on through his writing, his family, and of course, the center, whose mission, and I quote, is to elevate and amplify discussion of race, gender, politics, and the world, just as Shirley Povich did each morning in the Washington Post. Thank you to our panelists, and to Mark Hyman and Caitlin Wilson, and everyone else who made this event possible. Please enjoy what is sure to be a great conversation.
Okay, back to me briefly. Christine, I'm gonna hand off to you very soon. Something seismic is happening in women's sports. I think we all know that. And this evening we're gonna measure that something, whatever that something is. We're gonna analyze it and we're gonna celebrate it with an exceptional panel that I now have the honor to introduce to you. Starting with, on my immediate left, LaToya Sanders, Associate Head Coach of the Washington Mystics. LaToya played college basketball at the University of North Carolina, where she was one of the most prolific shot blockers in school history. In her junior year at Chapel Hill, she recorded at least one block shot in every game that season. She was a first-round draft pick in the WNBA draft of 2008. She played 7 seasons in the WNBA and later played professionally in Turkey. Briana Scurry, starting goalkeeper for the 1999 U.S. Women's World Cup team, arguably the most celebrated sports team of all time in the U.S., my opinion. She was a starting goalie on 3 World Cup teams, 2-time Olympic gold medalist, 2017, she was elected to the National Soccer Hall of Fame. Critical fact, she's an author. Her memoir, My Greatest Save, was published in 2022. Roxanna Scott. Roxanna is executive editor and vice president for sports at USA Today. During her time at USA Today, she's directed coverage of 6 Olympic Games. She previously worked at the Dallas Morning News as deputy sports editor. She's a graduate of the University of Iowa. So she speaks with authority about Caitlin Clark. Roxanna is also a member of the Povich Center's advisory board and has been a great friend to the Povich Center. Jason Murray is sports editor of the Washington Post, graduate of St. Mary's College of California and the Newhouse School at Syracuse. We're not going to penalize you for that.
Nothing wrong with being second best.
I'll stop there. I was going to make a comment about a story soon to be appearing in the Post, but I'm not going to do that. Our moderator, my great friend Christine Brennan, is sports columnist for USA Today, also a commentator for CNN, ABC News, PBS NewsHour. I'm sure I've left out a few. Those are the ones that come to mind. 3 times has been named one of the country's top sports columnists by the Associated Press sports editors. She's written 7 books, including Inside Edge, which was named one of the top 100 sports books of all time by Sports Illustrated. Christine is an alum of Northwestern University, both undergrad and master's. Again, no penalty for that. And like Roxanna, she's a member of the Povich Center's advisory board, and like Roxanna, a great friend to Merrill College and to me. So, Christine, thank you.
Thank you. Mark, thank you very much. Hello, everybody, and we're thrilled to have you here and have this hour and a half of conversation, which will include you. We want to make sure that we have plenty of time for questions and comments and any thoughts that you have that you'd like to ask this incredible panel. I am so thrilled to be here. I mean, we are talking about fantastic panelists. Thank you all for coming. And it's just a fantastic topic, wonderful topic. And yeah, Mark, as you said, Jason, it would be bearing the lead if we weren't saying, when's the story coming, man? Go ahead.
Is there a story coming? Is what Kim Mulkey said true? Hopefully so.
All right, well, good. And I think all of us who love journalism had quite a chuckle with Kim threatening the Washington Post. I, of course, spent 12 fabulous years at the Washington Post myself, and the thought that the Post would be quaking in their shoes over Kim Mulkey when it is the newspaper that broke Watergate and published the Pentagon Papers. Yeah, right, Kim. So good luck with that. So anyway, we can't wait to see it. I'm going to start out just with our 4 panelists, and a very simple question is the topic of the reason we're here, the Caitlin Clark effect. To you, what is the Caitlin Clark effect? What does it mean? What does she mean? Where has it taken us? You can take that question any which way you want. Why don't we just start here on my left, LaToya, if you'd like to go first with that. Thanks so much.
Sure. For me, overall, the Caitlin Clark effect starts off with just one word in mind, and that's growth. Growth in women's sports, especially women's basketball. Growth in attendance of games. Like everywhere she goes, she is selling out arenas, whether she's at home or on the road. Even in the WNBA, like as soon as she declared that she was coming into the draft, tickets skyrocketed. I think we might be close to a sellout already for our own game versus the Indiana Fever. It also means growth of viewership. Like, how many records have we seen broken of viewership on ESPN? She had her own streaming following her during her game. So just growth in the viewership of women's basketball. And I think more importantly, as a former college athlete, is just being able to take ownership of your own likeness. I think is probably the biggest thing. When I was in college, we had to tiptoe every line. We couldn't make money off of our own things. We couldn't have even like part-time jobs working, in fast food because we couldn't make too much money. Like everything was centered around just us playing sports and then letting the university benefit off of our success. So I think for me, that's the biggest thing is just the growth overall for women's basketball and taking ownership of our own abilities.
Thanks. Briana Scurry, who, by the way, had the greatest and most important save in the history of U.S. soccer, and let's just say soccer in general, 1999, third penalty kick by China. And before I go to you, I would love you to include in your thoughts and answer the impact that the 1999 World Cup team, cover of Time, Newsweek, People, and Sports Illustrated the same week. No story in the history of stories has ever done that. That's how big a deal that was. I was honored to cover it. I was honored to get to know you and watch that Rose Bowl full to capacity as you make the save that makes Brandi Chastain possible. Otherwise, you guys might still be
Bless your heart.
doing penalty kicks. I have no idea. Would have gone on forever. But there is some similarity here, I think, with what we've watched with Caitlin Clark, and it's organic in both cases. It didn't start top down, it started bottom up, right? The minivans, the moms, driving, and dads driving their daughters to the game, going to New Jersey, going to the Rose Bowl, going to Landover for that game. And Caitlin Clark, again, just kind of building and building. So curious your thoughts on that and anything else you want to talk about.
Well, first of all, I want to say thank you for having me. Christine and I go way back. And so whenever she, has something going on and I can be a part of it, I am more than happy to do that. So thank you for having me.
Is the mic working?
Yep.
Okay.
I can use my outside voice.
Just
I
seemed
don't need a
like-
mic. But I think what's intriguing about the Caitlin Clark effect is there is some similarities to what we were able to do in 1999, and I have thought about that even before I knew I was going to come here today to talk to you about it. It was a lot of similarities, a lot of different things, but a lot of things that were very clear to me, very familiar to me. And just like was said already, truly for me, the thing is, equity, basically. I mean, women's athletics finally coming to the fore, finally being the lead on GMA and Today's Show and guess what Caitlin did last night and all of that kind of stuff. That stuff never used to happen before. And now that it's happening, it's very interesting, but it's taken decades. Like she said earlier, back in the day when I played in college in the 90s, I got a scholarship to go to UMass, but heaven forbid, another dollar more. Like, sometimes you as an athlete, as a student athlete, you have a lot of things you have to handle. You have to handle the workload in class, but also your responsibilities and expectations as an athlete. And there's a lot, and it's not always as glorious as it may seem. I mean, it's extra things, and for a lot of us, and me in particular, without that scholarship from sports, I wouldn't have gone to college in the first place. And so it's just really fantastic to see women's athletics come to the fore now. And when I played soccer in 1996 Olympic Games and also 1999, we had to sell our game. We had to sell our game to this country because, nobody understood a sport that you don't use your hands, except for me, as the goalkeeper. And so there was a lot of education, a lot of extra work that we had to do to get this country interested in what we were going to do. And we knew that we had a great product. And we also knew that America loved a winner. And we felt like we had a really good shot at winning the World Cup in 1999. But we spent several years fighting for our voice to be heard, fighting for visibility, fighting for women's sports to be, women's soccer in particular, in my case, to be on the minds in the sporting arena in every city in this country. And being able to win the World Cup in 1999 the way we did in such dramatic fashion definitely helped. And so women have had to fight and fight and fight for everything we get. And oftentimes when we get, a few things here, we're continuing to fight for additional things. Somebody comes around the back and tries to pull one of those things that you already earned off the table. And so it's a great thing to see right now. I'm excited about it. And it's been a long time coming now. Make no mistake, this didn't happen overnight. Caitlin Clark as an athlete, as a human being, as a woman, as a person, has been training her whole life for this moment, has been in, when nobody's looking, doing her thing, when nobody's looking, doing those extra reps, those extra sets, that mindset, that ability, that understanding that I can be more, I can do more, I can have this amazing moment in my life. And she's young still, and so she's gonna make some mistakes sometimes, and I just want to make sure that when we see her make those mistakes, and she will, you can't win everything, you can't be everything to all people, that we still support her, because America does love a winner, and somebody who breaks a record that's been there for 40 plus years, we as Americans, we love that. But I think it's awesome to see. I love collegiate sports. I think it's revolutionary finally that we are able to see college athletes make money. I have been an advocate for that for a very long time. It's not always the most popular thing to say, but I completely believe it. There's a name on the front, but there's also a name on the back of that jersey. And it's the name on the back of that jersey that makes all the money for the schools. And so I'm very happy to see those athletes get a little bit of that back, because for the longest time, you get in trouble if you want a little bit back, and I'm glad that that's not the case anymore. But in a nutshell, I think the Caitlin Clark effect is the next evolution of women's athletics and women's sports in this country, and I'm just excited to be able to witness it after all we've been fighting for decades.
Thanks, Bri. And Roxanna, obviously you've had a bird's eye view as a Hawkeye, but also as the editor, of course, at sports editor and executive editor, vice president of sports of USA Today, and my boss. And one of the very cool things about the Caitlin Clark effect for our newspaper and our news organization is you decided early on to have a dedicated Caitlin Clark reporter. And I don't know any other newspaper, news organization in the country has done that. Lindsay Schnell, our great colleague. Why don't you obviously talk about what you believe the Caitlin Clark impact and effect is, but also about your decision-making. I know I really can't see you. Your decision-making, there you are, in terms of covering this incredible story.
Yeah, no, thank you, Kirsten. That was so great. I'm like ready to pop out of my chair.
Good.
I know. So inspiring, thank you. So for us, being an Iowan and seeing women's sports and having covered women's sports for 30 years of my career, and I was actually at Iowa the first time they went to the Final Four in 1993, and was sent by my student newspaper, the Daily Iowan, to Atlanta to cover the Iowa team. They played Texas Tech. Cheryl Swoops was the star of that tournament. But just thinking back then to how that was covered and seeing today what we see around women's basketball, for the championship last year, Iowa and LSU, 10 million people watched that game. It was the first time it was on ABC, and that is great news for us, because when people are watching live, they're also engaging with content. They're reading stories, they're looking at photos, they're Googling. So again, it's been a dream for us to cover this big story. As Chris said, I had a reporter come to me, I think in October, and say, look, she's gonna break this record. I want to plan out the coverage. Lindsay had covered Kelsey Plum when Kelsey broke it a few years ago, and she said, I think this is a wonderful story for us to tell. I really wanna be a part of owning this coverage, and this is how I think we can do it. So we started tracking her every game. We started doing live files where someone would be covering it, and basically she's X points away, first from Kelsey's record, later for other records that fell. The other thing I think the Caitlin effect means to me is just how much we see her on, State Farm commercials during every TV break, Gatorade now, but also other women athletes as well. Other basketball players, we're seeing them also get those opportunities, and in the media coverage, that's what really sticks out to me is I think, yes, Caitlin is there, but there are also really good stories that are shining through, and these athletes are having the ability to have that broader stage, to be as prevalent as, Michael Jordan was in commercials all the time. Of course, not as a collegiate athlete, but later. And I also think that it's become sort of like appointment TV in sports. When is Caitlin playing? Kind of like when Tiger Woods was playing week to week on the PGA Tour. Like, what tournaments is he playing? I need to tune in. I want to be in front of the TV on a Sunday afternoon. I think that's the same effect that we see now.
Thanks, Rox. And Jason, you weren't at the Washington Post when I was there. Obviously, you're relatively new, and congratulations on your new role there. But I remember the days of walking into the sports editor's office and saying, why aren't we covering women's sports? And to his great credit, you guys might know him, but we don't need to mention his name, very involved here at Merrill for years, he would say, yeah, go. And so I covered that. Rox, we would have been at that 93 Atlanta Women's Final Four together, because I covered that Final Four, Shaw Swoop's victory in Texas Tech. But it was really a struggle. It was a different time, right? Just a very different time. I've got to believe now, right now, your coverage, as I've read and seen, is we're going with Caitlin Clark and Iowa in the women's tournament as much, if not more, than the men's. Would that be accurate?
Yeah, absolutely. Thinking about the Final Four, and when we were thinking about assignments for men's and women's Final Four, all of our columnists want to go to the women's Final Four in Cleveland because they know that's where the story is. You want to go where the important story is. And for me, thinking about the Caitlin Clark effect, I think about the audience. And last season in December, my NBA writer, Ben Golliver, came to me and he said, hey, I want to go write about Caitlin Clark. I think she's awesome. I think she's an amazing player, and I want to see if Iowa's going to give me some time. So that was in December, and he got to go out there in January and spend a couple days with her. Went to cover her at a game at Michigan, and then he came back and we said, let's write a story ahead of March Madness, and let's run it the Monday after Selection Sunday. That'll be a good spot to drop it in. And I was, I thought this is great. But even I was floored at the response to it. Everybody was reading that story. Everybody was passing it along, and it was sort of, it told you what was about to happen and that we were about to have this moment. And sure enough, they get to the Final Four, and like Roxanna said, 10 million viewers, and it is just, it's appointment viewing, like you said. It's what everybody's talking about at the water cooler the next day. I mean, even on the Friday night when they beat South Carolina, it was, I remember talking with Sally Jenkins, and she's so excited because she's down there covering the game. She's so excited about what she's seen, and it's just the audience that has come to this now, and that is, that she has activated, I think, a different segment of the audience that wasn't watching the game before and didn't realize what was happening. And kind of you start thinking about what's next is, can people see that there's more than Caitlin Clark? Can people see, because they're there at the game, can they now see that there's even more to it than what Caitlin's bringing to it? She's awesome and amazing, but there's tons of amazing players on her team, opponents. You watch last night and you're thinking, well, what's going to happen if they lose to West Virginia? And they're in that, the final 2 minutes of the game. I think they tied it at one point. West Virginia tied that game at one point, and you're like, well, what happens now if they lose? But yeah, it's just the awesome, the audience that she's brought to it is what I constantly think about.
Well, and coming right off of that point, so what does it look like? Caitlin Clark will be finished playing college basketball in the next 2 weeks, one way or the other. Obviously Colorado, then probably LSU, and then if I were to win those 2 games, then of course they're in the Final Four, and that would be the dream scenario, not for LSU and not for Colorado, but certainly for everybody else, and the media, and of course ESPN and ABC, what have you. So one way or the other, Caitlin Clark is finished sooner rather than later in college basketball and moves on, as you were saying, LaToya, of course, by the way, it's very quick. The WNBA draft is April 15th, and the season starts soon after. And so the Indiana Fever are here, June 6th, 7th, I think? Yeah.
May.
Oh, they play in May, okay.
Yeah, we start in May just because of the Olympics. We bumped it up.
Right,
yeah.
but I think, is the home game with Caitlin, I think, is it early
Yes,
June?
ours is in June.
Yeah. So if you want to get those tickets for $900 or whatever. So the bottom line is, whatever happens with her, right, she is, the college game is going to your point, Jason, move on now without her. So what does that look like? Does it sustain itself completely? There are naysayers. We might have those, those three guys somewhere out in Wyoming who don't like Title IX, hiding under a desk. Come on out, guys, it's over, But, there's still people out there, as we can see it, like, yeah, well, when she leaves, it's going to go back to what it was. I don't buy that at all. Obviously, there's Juju Watkins. There's so many other names, so many other great players. What does it look like over the next few years? Anyone want to just take that one? What does women's basketball look like next year? Is the interest there? Are the TV ratings as good or better than the men's? What do you guys think?
Christine, I want to know your opinion.
You were supposed to do that so soon, right? Yes. Well, while you guys are all thinking, I'll riff here for a second. Yeah, I think it's pretty close. I do. I think because, I don't know if anyone watched it was Iowa State-Stanford game. It was later, right? But oh my gosh, what a game. And you're thinking, I must admit, I hadn't really followed those teams as much. And then Iowa State point guard, how did we miss her? Well, because there's another school in Iowa, right? And Stanford always is so interesting and well-coached, et cetera. I think it's going to be, I think the similarities, Bri, exist with soccer. I really do. I think if you start 1999 and you see the stops and starts, 3 different pro leagues, $100 million, but poof, in a few years, but come back, the Olympics, et cetera. And we see now where women's soccer is and the interest around the world, of course, the Australian and New Zealand World Cup, the U.S. bombs out, and still the TV ratings are through the roof around the world. So I think it'll be very parallel, to be honest. 25 years later, right? Yeah, 25 years, how about that? And so I do think, there's no going back. And the coverage, which if Rox or Jason, you want to speak to that, the coverage, I'll speak to it as a journalist, there's no way you're going to go, okay, now we're not going to cover this, right? In fact, if anything, the storyline will be, how is basketball 1 year post-Caitlin, 2 years post-Caitlin, et cetera. But I just don't see any way in which the media all of a sudden go, hey, we're done with this. Quite the opposite. Thoughts, everybody else?
Yeah, I'll just say, I think what happened for us is my boss, Matt Vita, when I got there, I was the NBA and college editor, and he made it very clear to me that, hey, women's sports is a market that we want to invest in, and, particularly for you, women's college basketball is something that, that you should think about how we're going to cover and how we're going to approach it. And so even for the past few years, we have been devoting resources. And so, hoping that we got to the moment that we got to last year. And so I think for us in the media, even if there is a dip next year, it's such a short-term play to be thinking, oh, well, if there's a dip, we're going to pull back resources. She's proven, we've proven in last year and in this year that there is a market for women's basketball. And so it would be such a short-term play to not try and go after that market from our standpoint, and that we know that there are readers out there who want to read about this and want to read about interesting stories. So for us, no matter if there's, sure, is there a dip from 10 million to 7 million viewership or whatever next year, that's fine. But we know that market is there and we should be serving that market, just even from a naked business standpoint.
I think too, just when you watch this tournament, you're falling in love with different players. Like Audie Crooks the other night, I hadn't watched Iowa State either, but I was like, that's amazing. She's doing, awesome work. Juju, as you mentioned, Hannah Hidalgo, there's so many young freshman players now that are, driving that interest around the West Coast. You see NBA players tweeting about them, going to their games. So I think that interest is there and it's only going to grow. And like Jason says, if it dips a little, well, it's going to come back up, I think. And it's just like, I think with U.S. women's soccer too, there is so much interest around the women's program because you guys are winners. And, there's not quite as much interest around men's soccer because they haven't gotten to that World Cup level yet. So, but that's, it's sort of parallel in that sustained interest, even if there's one down season and they don't win the championship, everyone is still really invested in that fandom.
Yeah, absolutely. I think for me, the winning part definitely helps. In particular for women's soccer, we had to take on the mantle of not only trying to play great soccer, but also trying to advance our sport in this country, and winning definitely helps. People are more willing to tune in. People are more willing to show up if they're going to feel good about the experience they're about to have, which winning does. And there was some wondering for women's soccer about what would happen when Mia Hamm left the team and retired, and she did in 2004. And the way that we were able to sustain the attention and grow it, social media came on the stage, and then all of a sudden you knew about players individually, not just as the team as a whole, but you knew about, what kind of dog Sydney LaRue had, where does, this player live, Alex Morgan, what does she do, in her off days? And you got to understand and be a part of that player as an individual and as a person, and not only them as a footballer in this particular case, but as an athlete, but also as a person, as a mother, as a sister, and how do they hang out with their friends and all of that stuff. And so I think the key thing for this moment here is the media has to maintain its interest, because it's going to be something that the people want it. And if the media understands that the people want it, and there's room for women's basketball in particular in this case, the media has to make it available. They have to make it available so people can tune in. Right now, for me, I'm looking at South Carolina. 99 points is the number of points that they've won over the first 2 games. Talk about a juggernaut. And their coach, holy cow, she's making $3 million a year now, and she was part of this whole phenomenon in women's basketball. I feel like it started with her. The Dawn Staley effect was a thing also, but now it's gone from off the court on the bench to on the court with Caitlin Clark, and I think that's fantastic. But these instances have increased because the media is now paying attention. And let's not forget, what year was the weight tree situation? The difference between the women's training
21.
facility? Okay,
Yeah.
That wasn't that long ago. When the NCAA, that shows you what the NCAA felt, no offense, but let's just go there, let's be real, about how they felt about the women's game. And now they're on all these major networks all over the country, on the morning shows and this and that. The NCAA is like, oh, this is awesome. And it's like, okay, don't forget that this is awesome, because it wasn't that long ago when you didn't think it was. And so what's important is the media has to continue to have interest so that the numbers will continue to roll, and all these amazing players, aside from Caitlin Clark, can have their moment as well, because there's definitely talent, and it's definitely there to be seen by everyone and enjoyed.
Thanks. Toya, obviously you are the basketball player here. What do you think happens after Caitlin Clark?
I actually think I do think there's going to be a dip. I don't think it's going to be as drastic as some people are going to assume it's going to happen. And I think one of the main reasons is because you see the polarizing figures like Caitlin get these big Gatorade and Nike, but then you see these polarizing freshmen that everybody mentioned before, like Juju, who is signed with, Beats by Dre and Nike, and you see her on national commercials, not like local LA TV. Like you see her every day, no matter what part of the country you are. And I think it's not just her, it's Michaela Williams at LSU just signed with the Jordan brand. So you see her on commercials now. You see Fuwali at South Carolina, she just signed with the Curry brand. Cameron Brink, like we all see these big companies investing, and I think that's going to continue. One, because they can, and I think they're buying into women's sports, but also these are brands that also are going to translate and follow them post their college career. And I think that's very important. I want people to invest, not just because they're, they have this spotlight now in college, but even when they go to the pros, because you're a good pro in college, let's keep it going and support the WNBA, because I do think naturally that the WNBA is going to get an up in fans just because of the Caitlin Clark effect. Like, people are going to want to see it, good or bad. Is she going to do well? Is she going to fail? Some people want her to fail. Some people, they want her to succeed. Right or wrong, there's two things that are always going to pique America's interest, and that's winning and that's controversy. So I think either way, there is going to still always be an audience to watch basketball, whether it's the right intentions or the wrong intentions. So I don't think there's going to be a dip. We have, a really, really good talent pool behind Caitlin Clark, and even now, there's players outside of Caitlin Clark that are really, really talented, that are also doing the same thing she's doing, but it's just not talked about as much. Like, you could say the same thing for Angel Reese. Like, when she goes to other arenas, she's selling out. They played a game in her hometown of Baltimore, and they were selling out, lying around the corner. So I think there are also other players that's getting this opportunity. It's just not on the same scale. But I think once Caitlin Clark moves on, other people will step up and just replace her.
And of course, that would be the thing she wants more than anything, for sure, is, that this is the building block, right? So let's go right to the topic. You guys may have heard there's social media, there's Twitter, I don't know if you've ever heard of it, X and other things, and where people give their opinions. And there's a lot of opinions out there. And certainly one of the topics that has been discussed, and it's a valid conversation, even if it does kind of start in the cesspool of X or Twitter, is the issue of race. And we want to address that as a panel. And I think it's a really important conversation to have. And so I did give a little preview just to make sure that everyone was on board with this. Here's the question, plain and simple. If Caitlin Clark, everything about her is the same except her skin color, if she is black instead of white, how would this story be different? Does anyone want to start with that?
I'll go.
You go, girl.
I can honestly say that I believe it would be very different. When I was playing soccer for the U.S. Women's National Team, and in 1999, the Women's World Cup, after I made the penalty kick save, the media, after the game, I was, hanging out with my teammates and whatnot, and I went into the stands to meet with my girlfriend at the time, and the media cut away. Later on that day, when we had interviews and whatnot, all the media wanted to ask me about was why I came off the line. Did I come off the line? Do you think they should have called it back? Whereas my teammate, Brandi Chastain, who made the winning penalty kick after 4 other kickers had made their kicks, got all the accolades, got all the attention, got all the questions that were very different than my questions. Now, this took me several years to understand, because initially I thought the reason that I was being criticized instead of, complimented was because I was a goalkeeper. And then it wasn't till years later when another teammate of mine, who was also a goalkeeper after I was no longer starting for my team, and she came into the fray, Hope Solo, and then she was doing similar things that I was doing, and she was getting an amazing amount of accolades for doing less than what I was doing as a goalkeeper. Then I realized, okay, it's not the goalkeeper piece. Then I thought maybe it was because I was gay. And then I realized it was because I was black. And so, do I think that race plays into things? Absolutely. Do I think that if Caitlin Clark were black or a woman of color, would she have as much attention on her, as much media, as much interest? I would like to think that she would, in my heart, because for the longest time I wanted it to be because I was a goalkeeper, not because I was black. And it crushed me when I realized that that was, in fact, the reason, and it took me a long time to get there. And so I would hope that today's society is very different, but I fear that it is not. It actually may be more polarizing in some instances than it was back then. And so I feel like, unfortunately, I got to keep it real, that's just how I roll, that it would probably be different if she were a player of color.
Thank you. Rox?
I agree with that, and I think there's an example that was in the news today that makes me believe that. I mean, there's tons of examples every day, but I just think that racism is so pervasive in our world. You know, this morning I awoke to news that the Utah women's basketball coach, Lynn Roberts, had said that her team was the victim of racially motivated hate crimes when they were staying in Coeur d'Alene, Idaho. They had played in Gonzaga. All the hotel rooms in Gonzaga in that Spokane area were sold out due to another event, so they had to stay in Idaho. And you know, it was just a horrific event. We wrote about it based on the police report. The team was walking to dinner from their hotel. Someone came up in their truck and revved the engines at them and called them the most awful racial slurs. And the team felt very threatened. And then when they were leaving to go back, it happened again. And there was another truck, again, revving their engines and yelling these horrible words. And Roberts said, she said, yeah, I think it happens a lot. It doesn't get talked about enough. And so I just think that these examples, we read about them too much, and to me, it sort of illustrates the kind of world we live in, and unfortunately, I do think it would be a different story if she were a woman of color and doing all these, you know, wonderful things. I think there's another example that I can talk about briefly. Lindsay Schnell wrote a story about how the next generation of superstars in the college game. It's great that we have women of color because this game has been built on black women and their accomplishments, and you know, 70% of the WNBA are black women. And the amount of hateful emails that she got, that I got, for a story that was talking about, you know, Paige Beckers and other players saying, you know, women of color are not getting the same commercial opportunities. You know, just saying this as fact, people who were involved in the game, Lindsay Gottlieb and others, it's just, I just think there are so many divisive, you know, opinions about race in this country that I don't think it would be the same sort of story we're seeing today.
Yeah, I agree. I don't think it would be the same. I don't think you would see the level of viewership, especially of people that didn't watch basketball previously, jumping on board to all of a sudden start watching. If Caitlin was a black woman, you know, briefly, I go to every Final Four to scout, and I remember going to the Final Four last year, and when they were playing LSU, like, to me, you could just feel the tension before a jump ball. You know, the Iowa fans didn't really understand why the LSU players wasn't even out for the national anthem, and that it just went downhill from there. Like, I'm just sitting here, you know, and I'm hearing like all these, you know, people saying things about how could they? I can't believe them. They're not American. Da 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 da. Just going on and on and on. And at the same time, you know, you hear LSU fans, you know, supporting their team, and so the fans are going back and forth the whole game. And then the trash talking ends up happening, you know, when LSU pretty much has the championship in hand with, you know, waving and pointing at the ring finger. Oh, she needs to be humble. She needs to, you know, that's just ghetto. What happened to sportsmanship? You know, I think there's a whole separate conversation that can be had about, you know, if a white athlete and a black athlete acts the same, just the different words that are attached to them. You know, if it's a black person, they're aggressive. You know, they're just aggressive player versus like, oh, if it's a white player, they're tough. You know, just a simple flip of the word, and it just takes on a whole new meaning. And so I just don't think it would be the same. I think there would be a lot of coverage, maybe a little less positive coverage, more like, I'm saying a little, it'll be a lot less positive. But, and, you know, people, just even more people rooting for her to fail, to say, oh, see, I told you, you know, oh, that's they all, you know, there go another one, you know. So I think that, you know, I think it's a conversation that, you know, still needs to be pushed forward. I think that's why, you know, Angel Reese, she has the platform that she has, and Even when it comes to NIL deals, I think it's vastly different if you look at Angel's group of NIL deals versus like Caitlin Clark's. Like hers are, Fashion Nova and Mael Hair Care, which all are centered towards African American women. You know what I mean? You don't see her she got Reebok from Shaquille because he's an LSU alum. But if you take that one out, all of hers are smaller, local things that relate to her as being a black woman versus being a talented college basketball athlete. So, that could be a whole nother conversation. So just wanted to throw that out there.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. That's very valuable. Jason?
Yeah, I just echo that. Caitlin talks a lot of trash on the floor. I think Caitlin is cold on the court, and I think she's awesome. She talks a lot of trash, but that is not really how, if you went down the list of things you thought about Caitlin Clark or that people would say, trash talk would be pretty low. If you do that with Angel Reese, trash talk is pretty high, right? It's just how you view those athletes, and we won't even get into again, about NIL, what standards of beauty are and whatnot that influences what type of NIL deals you're going to get. So, yeah, it's naive to think that Caitlin's race doesn't, play into that. Of course it does.
Well, and, I think if there is a positive in this, and I'd love to hear, again, all of you on this topic, the fact we're having the conversation, right, that it's out in the open and that people are realizing, hopefully, some people are realizing, I'll speak for white people, some white people are realizing that the view that we have had is a view that is antiquated, wrong, racist. Even if you don't think you're racist, it may be racial as opposed to racist, whatever it might be, whatever words we want to use. Is there any positive in that? That literally we've just spent the last 5 minutes on this very topic. I don't think we would have spent, there would have been no reason to be here or to spend time on the topic 10 years ago, right? Is that a positive at all? Is there something to be found in this conversation forcing people to start to look at these issues in a way they haven't before? In this case, because we're looking at Caitlin Clark, a white woman, and then look at Juju, and you'd say, well, let's hope next one is Juju, but how will we be looking at Juju? Is that almost like moving the story forward in a strangely positive way or a potential positive for our society? Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think times are better in the fact that we can have the conversation. So in my situation with the national team, I was essentially a fly in the milk, essentially. Playing a predominantly white sport, suburban white sport, with the majority of my teammates being white women, and in terms of who played, being a starter, I was the only starter that was black for many, many years. Now, fortunately, that is no longer the case, but it was the case for a very long time. And I will say that George Floyd situation, his murder in May, I think it was May 2020, really changed things in my circles, because I had so many of my teammates listening and watching and reading and into what was happening. They would call me and ask me, or call me and say sorry to me, or they wanted to know if they were ever out of line or tone deaf, or didn't see me as black or whatever. Did they ever offend me in any way by not understanding what they were saying may or may not be racist? Fortunately, in my case, my teammates were fantastic, but they would have never asked that question of me before. And so I think in today's society, yes, the fact that we can have the conversation is important, and I think it's vital to have the conversation, because this topic is as important as the topic of men versus women. And it's important to listen to these conversations and don't walk away, don't shut out, don't tune off to what the situation is and the perception is and how people are treated. It's better to know so that you can change and be different or educate yourself than to act like it's not happening at all, because it's happening everywhere. And the fact that you were saying about the story about these players in Idaho, it breaks my heart, because these girls were there to have an experience, and the fact that they are exceptional athletes, and then to have some self-entitled people, men, and I'm assuming men.
You're right. Yeah.
Well, I'm sorry, but this
You're
is
right.
this is who did it, and it's like, so white men need to listen, because you're at the top of the pyramid, and I understand that sometimes you may feel like you're being targeted or attacked, but trust me, a lot of us who are on the other end of that spectrum have been targeted and attacked our entire lives. And so asking you to just listen, I feel is the least you could do.
Thank you. Any others on the spinning it forward and hopefully the positive? Well, let's go to our two editors. The conversation, I mean, could you foresee stories and assigning stories for people to discuss this exact topic? You know, the topic of, Rox, you did, because Lindsay wrote that piece. But let's just say, you know, we've got Juju, we've got Hannah Hidalgo, we've got all these real, you know, superstars. I mean, the logo 3 with Caitlin is clearly the thing, right? I mean, that is extraordinary. So it would be great if we could have apples to apples, right? And have a young woman of color who is also hitting logo 3s, which there is some of that. But that would be the opportunity then to start to look at the different, do you foresee in the next couple of years that will be on your plate? Stories like that, analyzing, looking at why, if in fact it is true that someone is not being given the same endorsements or judged in a different way than Caitlin Clark, that there are going to be stories to be written and conversations to be had?
Absolutely, and both of us have the honor of having 2 columnists who write about race and inequality as their full-time jobs, and we have these discussions in our newsrooms all the time. I think, you know, what's been different this year for me in terms of coverage and sports meetings is that we are leading talking about women's basketball. You know, everybody wants to know, how are we covering today's, you know, tournament games, and men's basketball is sort of like secondary to the conversation. You know, people are not as like enthralled when I go to the, you know, 1A news meeting when we're talking about world politics news, all of that. Everyone's interested in talking about women's basketball this year.
Yeah, I think, you know, again, maybe we work at, you know, unique newsrooms. I hope not, but yeah, one of our, you know, beats is the intersection of sports and society. And so we're supposed to be talking about that and writing about stories that talk about those types of things, and writing columns and opining on those types of things. And it's only going to become more prominent. I mean, I don't want to be a downer, but, you know, yeah, I have hope, and I'm not naive to say, like, things are not better than when my parents were here. But we've also got, you know, a long way to go. 2016 unlocked, you know, for worse, a lot of things. And, you know, in Idaho, the governor was passing a DEI law yesterday or the day before. And, you know, now today he's out denouncing what happened. Well, you know, what environment are you setting up? You know, are you setting up an environment for this to flourish? So, you know, frankly, I think it's going to be obviously an issue, you know, still a very large issue going forward. And so, you know, we've still got a lot of work to do. And just as newsrooms, you know, we have to write about it and can't shy away from it and be scared of it. And like Roxanna said, you know, I mean, I'm sure you all have experienced it too, you know, the emails and, you know, the you know, kind of the communication that our writers get and the people that are on the front of this writing about it get is, you know, just horrific and nasty stuff. And so that tells you, you know, yes, you know, there are people who are doing well and are listening and learning, but there's still a lot of people that aren't, and a lot more than I think we thought, you know, a few years ago.
Right, yeah, we learned a lot from 2016. This is sports, but might as well refer to that too. I think you guys know what we're talking about. And here we are again. We have about 35 minutes, and we can keep droning on ourselves here, but I think it's much more important to hear from you, all of you. Questions, thoughts, comments? Well, just a second. Let's see if we've got a student. You're a very old student, sir. Yes, yes, ma'am. If you give your name and who you are, and then, of course, go ahead and ask the question.
I'm Judith. I'm a senior, journalism major. I was maybe thinking beforehand, but I was going to ask about the race. Like, how would it have changed if Caitlin went to, like, a different school? Either, I don't exactly know how good, like, Iowa women's basketball was, like, before she came, but more of, like, a powerhouse women's basketball school, or, like, a school that, like, maybe not as many people heard of, or, like, I don't know, wasn't such a big profile for that.
Well, she wanted to go to UConn, as we've learned, and Gino didn't want her. So, well, there you go.
I'd love to answer that.
Yes, please.
I think that's a really good point, an interesting point, and I think being a native Iowan myself and like the lack of professional sports, right? A lot of people are Bears or Packers fans, but I think because it's a state where women's basketball in general has been a huge part of the identity, plays a role in her popularity and as much, as we know about her. I also think that just sort of the growth of the Big Ten, right? Now that they're on, networks all the time, they come to Maryland, they come to Nebraska. That also affects her reach. So being in a power conference is definitely part of her story. But it's a great question. I'd love to think about that.
Yeah. Other thoughts on that? Go ahead, Toya. What do you think? If she'd been at UConn or, well, I guess Tennessee's more on the. And by the way, can we the Lady Vol thing? Oh my God. You got no lady stuff anymore, unless we're calling them the gentleman Vols, right? It's just, we love Pat Summitt, and it made sense at the time, but no more self-imposed sexism. Like, you get rid of that lady thing forever. Go ahead, sorry, I couldn't help myself.
I agree. I do think that, her being the hometown hero, definitely, catapults her status. I think, like, for example, if she went to UConn, unfortunately, because there's such a powerhouse that pushes out talent literally every year, that she might have fallen into, like, just one of another Geno's, all-stars, you know what I mean? So I think that, I also think that was her going to Iowa and staying again in her area was one of the reasons why there are new viewers. You see like the little boys saying like, "Oh, I want to be like Caitlin when I grow up." I don't think that would have happened if she would have left Iowa and went to a traditional powerhouse like a South Carolina or almost said Duke. Oh, absolutely not.
My stepdaughter goes to Duke.
Spoken like a true Tar Heel.
Any of the other powerhouses outside of Connecticut. Yeah. Can't say my Hills, because who brought up that stat about 99 points? That was me. We were a part of that. But no, I do think that a lot of her added fame is just because she stayed local and is kind of like the hometown hero.
It's an interesting point. Anyone else on that question?
I want to know why Gino didn't want her. Did he say?
It was in that ESPN story that's only 17,000 words, buried somewhere in the middle of it. I think he just wasn't that impressed. Did you know?
I don't.
No. Right. I bet even Gino would maybe admit, I don't know. Anyway, we'll go to the gentleman with the Terps. Give us your name and your year.
Hi guys, I'm Sam Dean. I'm a sophomore here. So this is a long-winded and kind of complex question, so I apologize in advance. But as someone who covers the women's basketball team here and is also a white man, as we were talking about, and making sure to listen, I do want to ask your guys' perspective on how to deal with covering the team and the sport as the sport and as a team, right? Because every press conference this year, a Maryland women's basketball player got asked, well, what's the Caitlin Clark effect? Like, how does it feel to bring young girls, see young girls come to see it? And it looks like they're just like, dude, I just want to play the game. Like, I don't know. You know what I mean? And then at the same time, you have, the ESPN article, we talk about, Caitlin Clark talks a lot of trash, but she also, throws her hands up at teammates, which isn't something I don't think a lot of coaches would encourage. I don't know if you would agree. How do you advise to cover the game as a game while also making sure that you're aware of the contextual history that comes with women's sports?
And everyone could hear the question, pretty much? Okay, wanted to make sure on that. Any thoughts, Toya? Or anyone? Yeah, go ahead, Jason.
I always subscribe to the theory, why can't we do both? But yeah, I think it's actually a conversation that I have a lot, in that we don't just want to, I think with women's sports, sometimes we can fall into the trap of only covering, like the societal issues with it, and that there is a game that's going on that's interesting and good, and that you want to make sure you're covering that as well and doing due justice to that. And so, when Caitlin Clark breaks the record, then we're going to write about just the basketball portion of that and how she did it and how amazing it was and what it took to do it, while also not neglecting, in other stories, the other pieces. So it's a mix of both, and you can't neglect either while you're doing it. And frankly, to be a competent beat writer on the beat, and kind of as you go further in your career, you got to be able to do both, right? You got to be able to write about, what's happening on the field and contextualize it for people, and also write about what's happening in the locker room and what, that is impacting what's happening on the field and what's happening off the field, for readers that don't care about what's happening on the field but might be interested in it. So yeah, I kind of subscribe to, you got to do it all. You got to be able to do it all.
I think it's important to educate if you have to. For the first 10 years of my career playing, we had to educate the reporters on the nuances of soccer, the nuances of a 0-0 game, and why is that exciting when it doesn't seem to be very exciting at all because nobody scored. Why do we care about that? So for the longest time, we had to explain and educate about our game, because we were fighting a landscape of 4 other sports that were more prominent and visible in this country, and we were trying to get our little no hands game on the map. And so now what's interesting about that is the winning helped people be even interested and intrigued about the game of soccer and asking the questions, and then we could educate. But now that the women recently lost in the World Cup, people don't talk about it in that education area anymore. Now it's just soccer. And so it's the women's team, but it's like, okay, what about them do they have to change? It's not about, the gender at all. Now it's just about the beautiful game and the X's and O's tactics and tendencies and all the technical piece. So women's basketball is having its watershed moment now, and I feel like if players in the game are willing to do some explaining and educating and helping along new people who are now involved, over time, you won't have to explain anymore, and it'll just be basketball. It won't be women's basketball, just like now it's soccer, not women's soccer.
And I love, just as a follow-up, I love that you asked that question, because 10 or 15 years ago, a young man like you would not have been able to ask that question because they weren't even thinking that way, right? I mean, that's how far we've come. So kudos to you for that. I mean, you're there, basically, because you're discussing those issues. Women's sports has always been about more than sports. It has always been, from Billie Jean King beating Bobby Riggs in September of '73 to obviously the 99ers and what that meant, the Title IX coming of age, the nation falling in love with what we had created with Title IX, to women's basketball, to where we are now, and everything in between. Serena, oh my goodness, the conversations, how much do we love Serena and Venus? I mean, we'll never see anything like that. Sisters, the greatest ever, and it's just unbelievable. And I was so fortunate to cover a lot of those major and Grand Slam tennis tournaments and get to know them and interview them. But it was always more than just the tennis, right? But they were also willing, as Billie Jean King was, as the 99ers have always been, including the fabulous representative we have here today from that great team. Every single woman has always been willing to talk about it because they realize it's just more than sports. And, there used to even be little things, Rox, you remember this, I'm sure, where the pictures that mostly male sports editors or assistant editors, whatever, photo editors would pick at midnight for a newspaper. If it was a women's game, it'd be like the women hugging or celebrating, or something. And the men, it's the shot, it was a whatever. This was a thing, and people were talking about it. And more now, you will see the photos be exactly what they should be. I mean, Caitlin Clark, yes, you see some of the whatever, but you also see her shooting. And so we really have come so far. That's, you can tell I'm pretty much an optimist in spite of a lot of things. And so I think, you're there. You're right there. You're doing the right thing. And, congrats on that. And thanks for that question. Let's see. Yes, ma'am, back there.
So I have a follow-up. My name is Emily Davis. I'm kind of just a friend of the program, not a student. I think the question that was asked before is really important, but also, like you were just saying, Christine, women's sports is not just men's sports light. There's different contexts. Women are different than men. Female athletes, women athletes are different than male athletes, than men athletes. And so for two of you, for LaToya and Briana, what do you think is important as a female athlete for men in journalism and sports journalism to know? And then for Christine as well, but Roxanne, all three of you, what do you want men in journalism to know about how to help tell women's sports stories?
Great question. Thanks, Emily.
That's a good one. That's a good one. Oh, I'm trying to think of the days when I was in the locker room and I always had to do. I think the biggest thing, and I know it's like now that I'm not playing and I'm on the other side, I kind of have a different mindset sometimes, but I think in general, when it comes to women's sports, I think I used to get annoyed again when, the context of the conversation or questions had to relate to, like it kind of got personal. Like it just, like you said, it went away from the sport. I remember when I was playing with the Washington Mystics and we were on our run to the finals, and then like the conversation just turned into like me and Liz Cambage. Like it wasn't about whether we won the game, that we advanced to the finals. It was about, well, you did this, and then she went on the internet and said that. And as a person, I don't have social media, so like I was oblivious to a lot of it, So I think I am a person who just likes the story to stay just pure to the sport. I'm not a person that likes things to, turn to the catty side, which is how they would rephrase it to women, the catty side of it. Just stay true to the sport. And I think another thing is like when you compare men and women's sports, don't try to, give suggestions on how we can even out men's and women's basketball and make it the same by like, moving in the three-point line or lowering the rims. Like, that's insulting. Like, that is insulting. Like, and if anything, at the NBA All-Star, watching Sabrina go against Steph Curry at his line and was just right there and literally beat the rest of the field in the three-point competition shows that we are capable. And so, don't try to. It's like to us it's an insult. Lowering the rims because if you have more dunking, we will watch more. No, you won't, because if you don't watch now, you just won't watch ever. So I think that's probably the two things from my perspective that I think male journalism can take away from.
Yeah, I love that answer, and also what Christine said about the editor looking for the picture. It's like if I see Trinity Rodman hit this great ball from 35 yards, let's not show her celebrating with her little TikTok celebration. Show the picture of her perfect form and her hitting that ball, and talk about that. Talk about how the ball barely spun and about how it almost had eyes and the vapor coming off the ball. And let's stick to the actual skill set and the amazing position she put herself in, as opposed to talking about her TikTok celebration after she scores. Let's stay with the skill set, the exceptional player that she is at her very young age, and let's stay on point, stay on topic. And I feel also with all of these things that we're discussing, the media plays a huge role. I mean, like Christine was saying about the words, and how she was saying about the words you use. Use the same words you would use for the beauty of Steph Curry's jumper and Caitlin Clark's jumper. use the same words for those things. And I think it's important because if you can do that, then you go to the essence of the sport and the beauty of whatever the sport is, and showing that you saw the same thing in the women's game that you saw in the men's game, and you can describe it the same way. I think that's really, really important, and I think media plays a huge role in advancing this and covering it properly.
Editors, any thoughts?
I think your point about words matter really rings true with me, and particularly with my history with
That was
Chris.
you.
Yeah, I know. I don't know what that was.
Raj is talking to you.
When I was promoted into my current role, she called me in 2020 and she said, there's something I think you really need to take care of, and it's the way we talk about sports. When it's college basketball, we cannot assume that we're talking about men's college basketball. I think we need to write, it's men's college basketball and women's college basketball. And, when we talked it out, it just seemed like, yeah, of course, but we were seeing this in our copy all the time. Someone would just write about college basketball and people would assume it's about the men. And, when we talked to the staff about that, no one objected. Like, of course we should do this. Let's just be clear. Let's, write it so it is very clear to the audience. And again, I think it's, something that is important to us, but really how we talk to each other in our staff meetings too, right? We're leading with women's college basketball stories, and we don't want people to assume that the default is, yes, we're talking about men. Certainly not this year. And when you talk about how important it is in our role, for putting information out in the world and writing headlines and choosing photos, we take that responsibility very seriously. And to me as a woman of color in this position, quite honestly, sometimes you feel like you really, you're representing a lot of people who are looking at us to set the example and to, be very precise in our storytelling and how we are presenting the stories to our audience.
Yeah, I would take that, maybe think about on a more global level in terms of like how we assign coverage, because I think, and somebody made this point on Twitter, I wish I could credit them, but they were right that women's sports aren't less than men's sports, or that it's not a lesser beat. We tend to think that, covering a men's game or a men's beat is the pinnacle, and that's what you're aspiring to. And if you get put on the WNBA beat, that is somehow lesser than if you're on the Wizards beat. And that's, we can't have that. We have to, treat them as, it is an important beat and an important sport, and matters just as much to our organization as if you were covering the NFL. And I think, we've got to do better at that as an organization. But like I said, slowly making progress, because everybody wants to cover the women's Final Four. That's where people want to be. But, we've got to do better at that. And, hopefully for all of you, that are in this room as aspiring journalists, that, hopefully you see opportunity in covering women's sports and not, only aspire to like that's lesser, and that I want to aspire to cover men's sports.
Well, and I think a couple things also, I'm so appreciate everyone's comments. The mainstream sports media has totally blown it on women's sports. We're catching up now, but a disastrous 40 years of ignoring the story. And of course, pushing away potential young readers. Again, no one here did this, but and no one person did it. It was a mindset. And that's why the word men's, the pesky adjective men's, how many columns have I written about that? And people laugh at me, and that's fine. Go ahead, laugh away. You've got to say men's basketball to distinguish between women's and give women's its due. For a long time, there would be headlines in newspapers, before these two were in charge of their newspapers, that would say U.S. soccer loses to Argentina or Brazil, whatever. I see U.S. soccer, I'm thinking more of her, right? Oh, it was the men. Because of course, why would you say men's soccer? The sexism and misogyny in sports departments around our country is legendary, unacceptable, and thankfully finally working its way kind of out the door. But I will say, headlines do sneak in. I'm sure, Jason, you were not on that night, but just last Monday, I saw the Washington Post said Virginia sneaks in, whatever, with Howard in first four, and the other headline on that page was Maryland women.
Yep. Yeah. No, it's still
Unbelievable.
it's still
right?
a thing, and we've had the conversation. But
Yeah.
it still happens. Yeah,
And
absolutely.
I'm sure that's an editor or somebody who's, I'm going to guess, a guy. Let's just be honest here. What the heck? I mean, we'll all be dead. I'll be dead in 20 or 30 years. So, might as well say it. There's some guy who thought that was the right decision, right? And again, I'm not picking on you at all. We could go down the line in any newspaper in the country, and the Post is way better than most, and USA Today is off the charts better than most. But if you look at Twitter, actually, it's been I will say again, turning things to positive, to see some of the sports writers, the men who we love, who would never, ever give the time of day to women's basketball, tweeting about Caitlin Clark and posting about Juju and Notre Dame and, of course, South Carolina, the greatest of all, and Dawn Staley, not only a great coach but a great American, carrying the flag at the 2004 Olympic opening ceremony. Such a great representative of our nation, Dawn, just the best. And now they are. But if you really ask them, if they had a couple beers in them, you know what I mean? And that is what we're looking at. And so your generation, young men, young women, you're the ones that are going to get rid of this nonsense, because it is certainly pervasive in my generation to this day. And there you go, speech is over. Next, let's see. I think what we're going to get all of you. What we'll do is a kind of more lightning round here. Ma'am, you go for, tell us, of course, your name. Thank you.
My name's Alexa. I'm a grad student at the journalism school. So just because I'm more interested in broadcast, Big Ten Plus and everything. What do you notice the same kind of verbiage between, going off of that last question, do you guys notice the same verbiage between men's and women's sports, where broadcasters are speaking about men's and women's sports a little bit differently? And how do you think broadcasters can be more mindful when they are talking about women's sports?
Well, there's production meetings. I do a fair amount of television, and I've done games over the years, but not doing that anymore. They're production meetings, and the tone has to be set the same way Jason and Rox set the tone. Rox was leading the 10 o'clock call this morning for USA Today. Jason, I'm assuming you have meetings all the time, right? And you got to set the tone, and you just got to say it, right? And thankfully for the editors, for the staff of Roxanna and Jason, we are talking the best of the best. And the men, as well as the women, great, they get it, because you wouldn't have hired them. Yeah. And same with USA Today, and of course in the Post. So, and the New York, the Athletic now, and LA Times, and there's many, many places that are doing it right. But it's got to be that way. It's got to be the production meeting. It's got to, and they've got to be in your ear if you're doing something. Brett Musburger, who I liked, and he went to Northwestern and all of that. And just the ridiculous sexism. Remember the Alabama quarterback, and he was going on and on about her girlfriend or whatever. How on earth there wasn't someone in his ear literally saying, we're cutting the mic if you keep talking about this? So the Boys Club, right? The Boys Club. It's just still this same feeling. And we could probably add the race issue too, right? It's just this sameness that we talked about here, we're still talking about. And I just think it's going to take a little more time. I think the Caitlin Clark effect, from my point of view, is that exactly this, that guys who would basically wouldn't ever want to give the time of day to women's sports, would have loved to have a ticket to that Maryland game, which our family bought tickets and we went. I didn't have a press pass. That game that Maryland lost by 8, but played well. In fact, I think portended the issues for Iowa down low. So I think it's happening. I think you're witnessing it more than anything. I'm not sure if that's a good answer to your question, and force that conversation when you're in those meetings. And you can ask it as in the form of a question. You don't have to come on too strong, but you can say, shouldn't we be, right? You can ask it that way. And also if you are a reader or a viewer and you see it, an email, a phone call, it's significant. It still gets people's attention for sure. Rox, you look at someone said, what about this? Or Jason, right? You'd read that email.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Absolutely.
What's your email address?
Jason.Murray@washpost.com.
And Roxanna?
rpscott@usatoday.com. And I think I don't notice it as much in broadcasts, and maybe that's because so many of the leading broadcasters, Doris Burke, Beth Mowat, they're women, so I guess I don't hear it as much. Do you guys agree with that?
Well, I think we have a somewhat interesting, I guess I would call it a conundrum in soccer in this country for our games. A lot of the broadcasters that talk about the men's soccer games are former men's players on the national team. And for the women, there's a lot of former women's national team players. And sometimes when you have a crossover of a men's broadcaster broadcasting on the women's team, there's a little bit of that underlying resentment that you sometimes hear, because if the women aren't playing well, they are, in there to rip it to shreds. If the women are playing well, then it's like, oh, well, just like they always do, they're winning, And so I don't know if that's the case for basketball, but in soccer, there's an undertone. But I would prefer just be balanced. And I do my best to, when I was broadcasting, my best to not sound superior as a women's player when the men were playing. And I don't ever want to hear the men, piling on when the women don't do well. I just want people to be honest and forthcoming about their opinions and be balanced. And it's sometimes very hard to do, I think, because there's some underlying resentment in some people sometimes, and we have to remember the human beings are doing this. And so do your best to try to be balanced when you're doing your broadcasting.
Got a couple questions. Yes, sir.
I'm Gibson, I'm a freshman, and obviously you guys talked a lot about focusing on the playing, the photos or how you write about it, but then you see all these ads, the commercials, so I'm just wondering, would any of this been possible, or how different would it have been if NIL hadn't happened? Would Caitlin Clark still be as popular as she is? Would all these women's players still be becoming what they are?
Could you all hear the question? Great question about NIL. What if we didn't have NIL with Caitlin Clark is kind of what you're asking.
Yeah.
I do think she would still be a polarizing figure just because of the social media aspect. There's just easy access to Caitlin and all her highlights. She has the celebrity of rappers coming to Iowa, and thinking that's weird, they're coming to Iowa to watch Caitlin Clark play. So I do think, and I mean, at the end of the day, the main thing is the main thing. The NIL came from her being a good basketball player. It's not like she got all these deals and then her play skyrocketed. So I do think that her being a polarizing player, doing something that really hasn't been seen on the college level and breaking all of these records is the reason that the NIL deals came. Because, I mean, people always ask the question, does anybody remember, freshman Caitlin Clark? No, not really. So, it's when she got older and continued to improve and get better, that's when all these opportunities came. So, and again, like I said, I think it's just all about social media. There's easy access to her daily life on social media, media following her. I do think with or without NIL, she would still have the platform that she has.
Interesting. Another one. Yes, you. Yes.
So I'm Aiden. I'm a freshman journalism student here. I'm just curious to know, I saw last night, I wasn't able to watch the game, but I saw last night on Twitter somebody make a really good point about how the coverage for West Virginia during the Iowa game was really bad. There was very few sideline reports, and they just didn't really focus on the stories throughout the game. I'm just curious, from a media perspective, do you guys feel like there's a responsibility when teams like Iowa or UConn with star players are playing teams like West Virginia who don't necessarily have a national star? Is there a responsibility to provide coverage of those other teams and bring some of the lesser known stories of those teams to the forefront as a way to grow the game as a whole?
Yeah. good point about a lot of controversy about the coverage
Yes.
of West Virginia. Yeah.
I absolutely think it is. In case you didn't realize, I've had my opinions about media for a very long time. And I do, well, you know, Christine, you know me.
I do. I think I've heard a lot of them.
But yeah, I think that's true. But obviously, it's a lot more glorious and more exciting to talk about Caitlin Clark. And that's where the broadcasting also can help with that. If you're staying more balanced and talking about, you know, if you have 5 minutes on the desk to talk about the game and it's halftime, don't spend 4.5 of those minutes talking about Caitlin Clark. Let's have a little bit more balance at least and talk about the fact that the game was fairly close for a very long time. And it was in the balance and talk about why. I do think they have a responsibility because had they lost, then everybody would be like, well, how did that happen? But they wouldn't know because you didn't talk about it. So I think it's important. You have a responsibility to the public who are watching the game to be fair about it.
Yes.
I'm Dash Tischler. I'm a sophomore at UMD, and I have a question. You guys have talked a little bit about how you think that Caitlin Clark will impact the WNBA. I was wondering, do you think that the league is in a position, given that it has probably it feels like it's made inroads in society, but it doesn't feel like it's really grown the way that it deserves to have grown in the last couple of years, certainly, and overall it's definitely been neglected media-wise. Do you think that she will be able to do you think that individual teams will be able to grow their brands from having more eyes in the league? And do you think they'll be able to take advantage of her presence? And do you think that for her herself, do you think that she will remain as big once she's in the WNBA? Or do you think that people sort of start to maybe think, oh, she's still a big deal, and they'll look for the next Caitlin Clark in college? How do you think that will all play out for the league?
I do think that I think women's basketball, especially in the WNBA side, has definitely increased in media coverage, notoriety since about 2020. Because I think we were the WNBA was one of the first people. I feel almost as always is to fight the fight. I think they've always been at the forefront of that. And I do think that is going to continue. I do think Caitlin is going to have success in the WNBA. But I want people to give her some grace because one of the hardest positions to make it at in the WNBA is a point guard. And just because she has this notoriety in college, there are going to be people that when she comes in are going to just look to be like, oh, I'm about to show her. She ain't just going to come into the league and just take over like that. They're going to take it as a personal thing. But I think she's going to succeed in the WNBA, not just because she is talented, but obviously she's going to be the number 1 pick in the draft. She's going to a team that has other pieces. Remember, they've had Aaliyah Boston, who was the number 1 pick last year. So it's not like she's going to have to shoulder so much burden like she does at Iowa. She's going to have a pretty good supporting cast behind her that they've built through the draft. I do think it's already happened as far as other WNBA teams marketing the Caitlin Clark game. Oh, the home opener versus Indiana Fever. Get your tickets now. We got the 3-game package when we play Indiana, whoever and whoever. It is already there are literally. I'm trying to tell you, literally when she declared. The Indiana Fever raised their ticket prices just like that. Yeah. They know what they're getting. They know the show. Even we were joking obviously because we play in ESA, which is maybe 5,000 seats. We was like, dang, I wish we could move that game to Cap 1 so we can sell 10,000 tickets instead of 5,000. So I do think she's going to be a polarizing figure, but I do hope that people give her the grace because if you look at the Kelsey Plum, she was Caitlin Clark before Caitlin Clark. She broke these records, the all NCAA leading scorer, blah, 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 and she struggled when she came into our league. Now she's they call her the dog, Kelsey. She's the dog. She's good. But it took her a little bit of time. So I'm just hoping that people give her the grace to learn the league because it is different than college.
Anyone else on that? What do you think?
I think it'll be interesting to see what's between her ears because that expectation going up to the WNBA is going to be very weighty. And we'll see if she's able to hold that in her mind and continue to be good. And with the competition on a daily, weekly basis, coming at her, as opposed to maybe in the Big Ten, she has a couple of games on her schedule that are like, oh, I got that. But in the big leagues, week in, week out, that whole league title, that whole league schedule, is she going to be able to hold that expectation and carry it? And I also think there's a possibility of having a similar effect that Lionel Messi had when he came over here to the United States for the MLS. You know, I, as a soccer person, did not watch the MLS very much. But if Miami's playing, I want tickets to that game as a soccer person, you know what I mean? And I think there's going to be some sort of response in that way. But like she said, there are going to be players that are going to want to put her in the ground, you know, from an athletic point of view.
Go ahead, Jason.
I'm going to give a slightly whiny media answer. Whiny, and the WNBA is sometimes a tough league to cover.
Yeah.
We've had difficulty cover, and you know there are lots of reasons, and probably good ones from their side. But it's been a tough league to cover, and so I think there's a conversation to be had, and I want to be careful here because I don't think we should say as the media to the WNBA, well, you know, you guys have to give us more access, you know, because you're a league, you're not, you know, necessarily understanding of the NFL or the NBA. But I also think, you know, the WNBA wants to grow, and that, you know, I think at base, our job actually isn't to promote the leagues. It is a byproduct of what we do because, you know, we have these big platforms. But, you know, we kind of work, you know, when we do that type of work, it naturally does that. And so, you know, I'd like to see us get to a better place with the WNBA in the league, because I think, you know, there are sometimes, like, I thought the Las Vegas Aces was a story that sort of, like, I would argue that's maybe the best WNBA team that ever, you know, played in the league's existence. I'm not sure that story quite got through. And I really wish that would have. And so, you know, I think with Caitlin coming into the league, you know, there's going to be more focus on the league, and I'd like to see us get that story right and work well with the WNBA to get that story right.
Okay, hold on one second. What's the barrier to coverage that you're having?
The WNBA closed locker rooms. They wouldn't, and that's I think the only professional league that does that. So that's a difficulty. That's a barrier to telling stories. And for us as journalists, going into a locker room and being able to talk with players and, you know, being able to establish a little bit of a relationship, so when you do have to write the big story, that athlete is comfortable with you. I think, you know, we don't get the opportunity to do that as much in the WNBA. And I know it's difficult. I think there's only 2 papers right now that travel with WNBA teams. We're one of them. So, you know, again, I get that. And I think sometimes there's maybe a different level of media sometimes that covers the WNBA. So I know there have been issues there with reporters that have covered the WNBA and that, you know, aren't, you know, always as professional as they need to be. So that's part of the reason that those locker rooms are closed. You know, but I'm coming at it from my end that I have a professional reporter that covers the league and that's really good at it. And, you know, he's, you know, maybe being punished for the sins of others. And so I think, you know, again, it's a little bit whiny media, and we can find a way around that. But I also think there were missed opportunities to tell stories about the Mystics, about the WNBA, that we couldn't get from that.
So that was a consequence of misuse of the opportunity?
By
as to
some,
why
yeah,
they closed?
by some.
Okay.
By some, yeah.
All right, got it.
No, I'm glad, Bri, that you're on the case to figure this out. No, we couldn't have a better person. But compare and contrast. I mean,
What'd you do?
Yeah, and I've written columns on the WNBA. I was at the championship in Washington. It was the last game I covered. But the difference between you guys in '99 and the WNBA, and the WNBA has to up its game big time. I texted someone at the WNBA I know, and I said, "Don't screw this up," you know, or are you going to screw, you know, something like that. It was funny. I meant it to be funny. But once Caitlin Clark declared, it's like they got to do better. And I'm not. We understand why things happen. But the women's soccer team in '99, you guys were Johnny Appleseed.
Yeah.
You were spreading the seeds, and you understood you were. Yeah. And I hope for the WNBA, and you are, you're not the problem at all. But I hope the WNBA starts to get, you know, has more of the '99 or feel in that, because this is the moment, right? This is the moment. And I'll just end this part, and if anyone has questions or other comments, we'll certainly, hang out here. I'm reminded of another athlete that I covered, and there were a lot of thoughts about this particular athlete who you've heard of, about, wait till you get into the PGA Tour, young man. This was back in the 90s. His name was Eldrick Tiger Woods. Wait till you see what happens here. It's going to be a whole different level of competition. Curtis Strange was one golfer who said it. I like him, good guy. There were probably many, many others. Like, all right, kid, you think you're hot stuff. Let's wait till you get to the PGA. And within a couple of weeks, Tiger already won a tournament and was off and running and won the Masters the next year. And, the number one thought, I think, first of all, is Caitlin Tiger? No, I mean, they're individual people. But can she be that person? And we'll find out. We have no idea. But certainly the conversation about is she prepared and ready for this really does remind me of a generation ago with Tiger. And the other piece of, as I know we all want, everyone, you want to play well against her, right? Of course, you guys are going to bring your A game for sure when you're playing the Fever. But the other flip side that I think we all understand and know, and we've seen in sports, all of us who've been so fortunate and so lucky to cover sports, Mark as well, for many, many years, is one of those great sayings, a rising tide lifts all boats. And so every single one of these college players and WNBA players, whether they love Caitlin Clark or can't stand Caitlin Clark, their lives, their finances, their opportunities are going to grow because of the eyeballs that Caitlin Clark is bringing to women's basketball. So on that note, I'm going to hand it back to Mark, but I just want to say a personal thank you to Toya, to Bri, Roxanna, and Jason. Thank you so much.
So we're late, we're over time, so I'm going to be very brief. But I found myself thinking as I was listening to the panel that, we talk a lot in the classroom about the importance in our profession of critical thinking and always taking time and care to think about the voices that you're including in stories and the questions that you're asking of those voices. And I think tonight we had the right questions and we had the right voices. It was a really wonderful and important conversation. So thank you all.